what software they want to use. So if you're sitting there monitoring your 32-core Epic-based system on your secondary monitor while watching this video, then just consider this entertainment. So step one of setting up a home server is to determine what you're going to use it for. Is this going to be a mask event? Is it going to be used for Plex? Is it a file server? Is it a sacrifice to detect gods? Is it all of the above? Or maybe you just don't know yet and you just want a home server to play around with, and that is totally too. The next step is to determine what your hardware is even capable of. How many cores does your CPU have? How much RAM do you have? How much storage space do you have? Does your CPU have integrated graphics? Do you have a dedicated graphics card? Your hardware will ultimately play a major role in determining what operating system you eventually go with. Now, some reasons are easier to upgrade than others. You can easily add more RAM, you can easily add more storage, and assuming you have both of your kidneys, you can possibly put a down payment down on a graphics card. But we're going into this guide assuming you have an older desktop system, and that's because that's what most people are looking to repurpose. Now let's talk about how that hardware determines which operating system you're going to run. And this is probably the most important aspect of your home server. So let me make one thing clear before we even start this. For 99% of people looking to build their first home server, it does not matter which operating system you go with. Pretty much all of the basic home server softwares will run in Windows, Mac OS, and whatever weird distribution of Linux your awkward cousins told you about at Thanksgiving. If you're comfortable with Windows and it's already installed on the machine and that's what you want to run, then go for it. My recommendation, though, is going with a Linux-based hypervisor operating system, simply because that's what they're specifically designed to do. But if you don't want to go with that, it's fine. It's your system. Tell me to kick rocks. Now, I said before that hardware will determine what operating system you go with, so what did I mean by that? Well, taking OS out of the picture, there are two ways you can go about setting up a home server. You can go with a desktop environment like Windows or Mac OS or Linux Ubuntu and have a familiar desktop GUI experience to work with, or you can play with the big boys and go with a hypervisor OS. A hypervisor OS is essentially an operating system that is designed to run on a server to support multiple virtual machines and multiple services at the same time. You won't get the desktop experience out of them because most of them use a web GUI to interact with, so don't expect to run Proxmox and also be able to have your familiar desktop environment. So I still haven't told you how the hardware affects which operating system you go with. So let's do that. A desktop operating system is designed to run on a single machine, running a single interface for a single user. And while you can install multiple services on it, as you add more things to it and build up a large collection of services, it does get less efficient. Hypervisor OS, on the other hand, is designed to run on a server. It takes all the desktop services that were there to provide you a desktop GUI, strips them out, and allocates those resources somewhere else. Some popular hypervisor OSs are Proxmox, TrueNAS Scale, Unraid, OpenMediaVault, TSXi, and if I didn't list your favorite hypervisor, then get over it, man. Now, you can run these on pretty much any hardware, but I would follow this kind of loose guide to minimum requirements. First being, probably most important, is to make sure that your CPU supports virtualization. And to check this, just Google your CPU model number followed by virtualization, and it should tell you whether or not it supports it. Second, I wouldn't suggest running a hypervisor OS on anything less than 8 gigabytes of RAM because when you're running a hypervisor OS, you're probably going to be spinning up multiple virtual machines, multiple containers, and you want a decent amount of RAM to allocate to each of those things. And the same thing goes for CPU threads. I recommend 8 of them. Notice I didn't say CPU cores. That is because some CPUs support hyperthreading while others don't. So one person can have 4-core, 4-thread CPU, while another person can have a 4-core, 8-thread CPU. So again, for the same reason as RAM, I would recommend 8 CPU threads. Now, these are the general guidelines. They are not written in stone. So if you want to try Hypervisor OS with one VM and you want to do it on 4 threads and 4 gigabytes of RAM, then do it. I don't care. Hopefully at this point in the video you have an idea of which path you want to go down. So what I'm going to do is show you how to set up services from both perspectives, from desktop experience or the hypervisor experience. The cool thing about this is that we will essentially be using the same service to set it up on both scenarios. Docker. If you haven't heard of Docker, it's essentially a service that containerizes services and softwares and allows you to deploy them in a consistent environment across multiple platforms. And the community is extremely active, so if there's a software out there you want to run, chances are there is an official Docker image supported. So let's go ahead and get this plugged in. Now, in this machine, I have an i5 4590T, which is just a 4-core, 4-threaded CPU. I have 8 gigabytes of RAM. I have a 64 gigabyte SSD as my boot drive and a 1 terabyte, maybe 2 terabyte, I can't remember, hard drive to act as my data drive. So based on the guidelines I listed before, this would be more well suited for a desktop environment system, but we're going to do both because, again, you can run whatever else you want, and those guidelines I gave earlier don't really mean anything. So let's plug in. Now we're going to dive into the desktop environment first, and for this we'll be using Windows 10. This is because it's the most popular operating system, and I'm not going to cater to Linux nerds on this one. You guys get everything else, so chill. Now, I'm briefly going to touch on storage because it's important and honestly deserving of an entire video, but I don't want this video to be Braveheart level length. If you have multiple hard drives in your system, I would strongly recommend setting up a RAID configuration, or as it's called in Windows, storage phases. This will allow you to combine multiple physical hard drives into a single volume, which will allow you better performance or better redundancy, or in some cases, both. If you want to learn more about this, just Google RAID configurations for Windows storage spaces. It's not too difficult to set up and will benefit you in the long run. So here we are in our Windows 10 machine, and while you can install certain software directly to Windows, like I mentioned before, we'll be using Docker just to give us a consistent environment across both platforms. So the first step is to install Docker on Windows 10, and luckily it's extremely easy. Just Google Docker install Windows, go to the first page. I know it's defaulted to using Win, gross, and follow the steps listed here. All you have to do is download Docker Desktop for Windows and make sure that you have this WSL2 backend installed, which is Windows Subsystem for Linux, which allows Docker to run. So once you get that installed, you will have this nice little Docker Desktop environment, and while it is useful for the basics, I wouldn't consider it that useful compared to some other orchestrators like Cortana. We'll get to that in a minute. First thing we're going to do is download a popular service called Nextcloud. Nextcloud is essentially your own personally hosted Dropbox, which allows you to share files across devices and across the cloud and from wherever you are in the world. So if you find software you want, like I mentioned before, just Google the name of the software and Docker, and there will probably be a supported image. So that's what we're going to do here. So we Google Nextcloud Docker. We see that there is a Nextcloud official image on Docker Hub. When we go to that, it is showing an official image, and here is all the resources for that image. And if you scroll through here, it will give you tons of information on how to get it set up, what volumes or variables you might need to set up during the way, and a lot of other information about the software itself. So luckily, it's extremely easy to get set up. If you're on a completely basic installation, it's literally one line right here, Docker run D port 8080 exposed to port 80 internally, and Nextcloud is the image you'll use. You can simply take that command, copy it, and run it in Windows PowerShell or the command line. And run that. It's going to download all the files it needs. I've already run this before, so it already has the image, but once it downloads that, it will spin up a container. So if we go to our Docker desktop, you'll see that we now have a container running, and we give it a random name, Destructed Galileo. And you can see it is exposed to port 8080. So if I go to localhost 8080, Nextcloud, that easy. And it's asking us to set up an admin account, so we'll do that. Very weak password, that's the password. Unhackman. And just like that, Nextcloud is configured and ready to go. Here you can see our dashboard, which we're already on. I guess I want to reload it. We go to files. You'll see our file system. It comes with a bunch of default files and default folders here, but here's where you can store a bunch of files that you may want to share with others across your LAN. And if you want to get this set up to where it's exposed to the outside world, I have a video for that. Link is up here if you want to check it out. But yeah, now you have a basic installation of Nextcloud. And running as a container in Docker on Windows. Now, the Windows Docker desktop environment isn't the greatest to use, and I mentioned something called Portainer before, which I think is a much better Docker orchestrator, so let's go ahead and get that set up. So again, like most things, just Google install Portainer Docker. On the official page, they give you instructions, and luckily they're extremely easy. The first thing we have to do is create a Docker volume, and we will do that here. Then once that's complete, we are going to go to the next line, which is much bigger and scarier, but again, just copy and paste. Okay, it's going to do the same thing before with Nextcloud. It's going to download all the required packages, the entire image, and get that installed. So wait a second for that to download, and it is already done and started. So now let's go back into our Docker desktop, and you will see we have another container running, Portainer, and that is exposed to port 8000. And you can see in the command we ran, we exposed port 8000 as well as 9443 now. 8000 is for HTTP, 9443 is for HTTPS. So if you go to localhost 3000 and it doesn't like it, then consider trying 9443 and in some cases 9000. And like I said, see how it's saying not found? It is wanting us to use HTTPS. So we are going to use 9443 and it's saying, oh, HTTP request HTTP server. That's because we actually have to enter HTTPS // It's going to give you this warning because there's a self-signed certificate. That's perfectly normal and okay. Continue, and here we have Portainer. We're going to create our password again, get getting started, and here we are in Portainer, a Docker orchestrator that is running in Docker. It's kind of like an Inception thing, but I strongly recommend going with this if you don't have much Docker experience. This will make it easier to get things spun up and monitored. So you can go to your local environment. And over here you can see your stacks, your containers, your images. Similar to the Docker desktop for Windows, you can go with our containers, and you'll see it is exactly the same as we see in the Windows desktop. And that is because it's just cleaning off the host Docker instance. Same thing the Windows desktop is doing. Docker is running on the host. These things are just looking at it and reporting back to the user. So the cool thing about this is that it makes it extremely easy to create custom templates or use the ones that exist here. So to go to templates, you can see a whole bunch of stuff is here already for us. So if we want to spin up a WordPress site, we can simply click on this, give it a name, our database root password, we specify that here, hit deploy stack, it's going to do its thing in the background, downloading images, and spinning up containers. So you can see we have a WordPress container and a WordPress DB container that houses the MySQL database. And both of those work in tandem to create the overall WordPress service. So if you look here, you'll see that WordPress is exposed to port 50609. So if we go to that 50609, here is our WordPress site, and we're just going to set up the default one. And here you go. We have a WordPress site running, and if we visit it, I'm sure it's nothing too exciting, but there you go. Host your own website, running through Docker on Windows. So Windows still running. You have access to a basic Windows 10 machine if you want to use it like that, but you also have Docker running in the background that is hosting other containers and other services that are providing more of a use as a home server than a regular Windows 10 machine. So yeah, that's it for Windows 10. Now I'm going to show you how we can do this in a hypervisor OS, which up to a certain point will be different, but once you get Docker installed, same exact steps, and that is the beauty of Docker. How you install something in Docker and Windows will be the same as how you install it in Docker in Linux and whatever flavor of Linux and even in Mac OS. So it's pretty great. Okay, now let's do the same thing with a hypervisor OS. So the one I'm going to be going with is Proxmox. That's because personally that's what I use now. I have videos on me trying to using other hypervisor OSs like Media Hall, TNS Core, TrueNAS Scale, and Unready. I will link all of those videos down below if you want to check them out. But today we are going with Proxmox. So I'm not going to go over the entire installation process of getting these set up. They're pretty straightforward no matter which one you go with. Just go to the website and follow the documentation. It's essentially going to be flashing the ISO image to a USB drive and then booting from that. Once you get that set up, you will access the web view using the IP address of the machine, followed by the port number specified depending on which one you're going with. Proxmox uses 8006 by default, and it uses HTTPS. So Once you're in, you will see something like this. Now, I've gone ahead and set up a container to run Docker just to make sure this video isn't like 10 hours long. I think it's already pretty long. But when you log in, you'll basically see your data center and your node, which is essentially your machine. And then in your machine, you will have maybe different storages, different virtual machines, different containers. There are different ways you can set up Docker. And
all paths. And then there's the testimony of the Spirit that says, you know what? That, quote, theology over there is not actually going to work for me. Because I have a witness inside of me that says Jesus Christ is the way. And it's not God being mean any more than you need oxygen to breathe. Remember? Oxygen. It's what makes us sustain life. I mean, we can't breathe without a good, healthy dose of oxygen. Is that just being narrow-minded? Is that being exclusive? Is that being mean? Was God mean to pick oxygen as our primary gas, the one that we need? What about hydrogen, Lord? What about nitrogen, Father? You're being cruel. Well, spiritually, Jesus is life. And so when God is life, and Jesus is God, and Muhammad is not God, and Buddha is not God, what do you conclude? I need spiritual oxygen. I need Jesus. That's not being narrow-minded. It's being realistic. And so what we're seeing is this confidence that we can have. We can literally say, I am from God, and I'm his child. And so there's philosophies and theories and thoughts about Jesus, but the truth lives in you and me. And that's incredible to think about. Verse 5, they are from the world. Therefore, they speak as from the world, and the world listens to them. Does it sound like that's not the context? Again, false teachers.
Sorry, there was a delivery.
Is that it's not about just a bunch of stuff you believe. It's not just about a bunch of statements you agree with. It's not even a movement. It's not a party or a movement or even a school of thought. It is genetics. It is spiritual genetics when you are born of God. That's what John is saying. And he's saying when you have the new genetics, when you're a new creation, when you're reborn in Jesus, that there's an innate love that takes up residence inside of you. So, I mean, what I'm trying to say is there's a lot of people that read the Bible, but when we really read the Bible and look at the words on the page and slow down enough to see what John is saying, I mean, what John is saying is radical. He's not just saying, be a sweet, nice, loving person, come on, would you? No. He's saying, God gave birth to you. God gave rebirth to you if you called upon him. And because you're born of him and you're a participant in his nature, then you now have love poured out inside of you. Love for your wife, love for your husband, love for your friends. When they diss you, they ghost you, they reject you, love resides in you. And you have that beautiful opportunity to forgive and release them, hit the reset button, and show off the Spirit of Christ who lives in you. Amen? The one who does not love does not know God. Thought. It is genetics. It is spiritual genetics when you are born of God. That's what John is saying. And he's saying when you have the new genetics, when you're a new creation, when you're reborn in Jesus, that there is an innate love that takes up residence inside of you. So, I mean, what I'm trying to say is there's a lot of people that read the Bible, but when we really read the Bible and look at the words on the page and slow down enough to see what John is saying, I mean, what John is saying is radical. He's not just saying, be a sweet, nice, loving person, come on, would you? No. He's saying God gave birth to you. God gave rebirth to you if you called upon him. And because you're born of him and you're a participant in his nature, then you now have love poured out inside of you. Love for your wife, love for your husband, love for your friends. When they dish you, they ghost you, they reject you, love resides in you. And you have that beautiful opportunity to forgive and release them, hit the reset button, and show off the Spirit of Christ who lives in you. Amen? The one who does not love does not know God, for God is love. Now, remember, before you go getting out your love-o-meter, before you go get your legal pad out and see who have I loved lately, remember, he's already given us chapter 3 before chapter 4. And he's already told us he's talking about Cain who killed Abel, and he's talking about hate versus love, and he's talking about how the world hates Christians, but Christians love Christians. And we don't always like Christians, do we? But we love Christians. Some Christians are close talkers. Would you just take a step back? How about a breath mint, would you? We don't like every Christian, not their ways, their manners, their habits, their quirks, their issues. We don't like all of that all the time, but we do love believers. You have an innate love inside of you for the church. God put it there. So he's talking about love versus hate. The one who does not love does not know God, because God is love. We love through him. We live through him. Why? By this, the love of God was manifested in us, that God has sent his only begotten Son into the world so that we might live through him. This kind of reminds me of John 3:16, right? For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him would not perish but have everlasting life. John here says we live through him. We live through the only begotten. He was born of the Holy Spirit, became fully human, fully God, but fully human. And then it says we might live through him. What does it mean to you that you live through Jesus? Have you thought about that? What does it mean that you live? I know that you're forgiven of your sins. We talk about that. We can fill a page with that. Oh, man, let me tell you the 27,000 things I did wrong, and Jesus forgave me. Amen. He forgave me. What does it mean that you live?
Project, and decided to move to Bradford to investigate the lives of drug addicts. Now this is a project that Lanny perhaps should never have touched. The opening scene of this documentary consists of Lanny sitting hunched over a tape recorder, interviewing a prostitute and crack addict called Nikki. She tells him of her harrowing story as a working girl on the streets of Bradford. Lanny appears professional and calm at first, until the mood suddenly changes, and before we can even blink, Lanny is sat on a dirty mattress, smoking from a pipe that Nikki had made for him. Lanny reveals to us that he began experimenting with heroin to aid him in his writing process. His philosophy was that he could never truly be writing an authentic story unless he knew exactly what it was like to take hard drugs, just like these people were. In his head, he justified it to himself that he could do it once, just for the experience, and then never again. That this was all strictly for artistic purposes. But unfortunately, this wasn't the case. Lanny had been addicted to heroin and crack for 6 years at the point of filming this documentary, and the progress on his book was moving at a snail's pace. As the film progresses, we learn more of Lanny's personal life, as Reagan has a conversation with Lanny's ex-girlfriend and mother to one of his children. She tells the camera how she had no choice but to kick Lanny out due to his drug habit that was becoming increasingly worse. With no home to turn to, Lanny saw that he had no choice but to surround himself with the other adults in that area. These were the same people that he swore he'd only become acquainted with in the first place to interview for this book. But now, he had become a morbid sort of family for Langley, and one of his only forms of human contact that hadn't totally alienated him due to his addiction. But investigating drug users wasn't enough for Langley. He wanted more. He wanted to dive even further into the drug world and learn every aspect he could for his book. And so, he attempted to make contacts with drug dealers, but they didn't want to talk to him. Never the quitter and always an extremist, Langley decided that the best course of action was to become a dealer himself. And from that point onward, threw himself into a life of debauchery and crime. During this time of dealing drugs, Langley was arrested by the police numerous times and was almost given an 8-year prison sentence. To anyone on the outside, his life was an absolute shambles. But to Langley, it was all part of the chase and thrill of his creative process. There is an excerpt from his book that Langley reads about his time parading as a drug dealer, and he boasts about locking a woman in a car and stripping her naked, demanding money which she apparently owed him.
Then the toxic button actually make the body one move. And that's you. The whole body is very and the longer you can go down, why am I doing this? How much more can I still play this already? How much more violent?
As we get midway through the documentary, we are shown just how far removed from normality he is. This is only further exemplified when he attempts to interact with his estranged son. He attempts to talk to him after his son's boxing match, but appears stiff and awkward. Langley only really seems comfortable when he's in his dingy flat or surrounded by other drug users. We are then introduced to Langley's stepson. It also reveals that he struggles with substance abuse, but Langley appears much more relaxed with this son, seeming to be able to relate to him on a more human level. The book isn't progressing as Langley is suffering from writer's block, and his creativity is completely stifled by the constant use of opiates. He is documented by Raven, hunched over his keyboard, retyping old material over and over again. He hasn't been pushing on with the remainder of what needed to be said. His excuse was that he needed to be clean before finishing the rest of the book, and that he wanted to write the end of it from a sober perspective, looking back on the whole experience. But there is one small detail that hasn't been mentioned yet. No publisher has actually agreed to pick up Langley's book. Therefore, Langley has absolutely no motivation to be clean or to complete it. So, Langley's excuse to continue this abuse cycle is no publisher, no book, and ultimately no point in being clean. Some time passes, and it looks like there is a glimmer of hope for Langley after all. He's finally decided to get off of heroin for good, and is being prescribed alternative medicine from the doctor in order to deal with withdrawal symptoms. He feels like his life is finally coming together again, and he's once again able to focus on his novel, and is in the process of repairing his relationship with his estranged son. But this happiness doesn't last long. Langley is on his bed again, with a needle hanging out of his arm, reiterating to the camera that he is absolutely not back on heroin, but that the pharmacy was closed, and that this was just a temporary measure. Keep him calm until they open back up again. And surprisingly, Langley seems to desperately cling to that hope. The camera cuts to following him to the chemist, and we see him take his prescribed medicine rather than the heroin. Lanry appears rather joyous in this scene, also revealing that he has cut contact completely with the other addicts and users that he's been interviewing, and that he wanted to distance himself from that world completely in order to move on with his life. There is only one other person he seems to remain in contact with from this world, a woman who is staying with him due to her recently becoming homeless. It was quite a hard-to-watch scene, as she tells us that it is Lanry's responsibility to inject her veins, as she couldn't find them herself. We see this woman get excited about her fix, and it is a rather depressing portrait of someone rotting away under her eye. So, this first documentary ends with Lanry being sober, and his book has finally been picked up by a publisher. All seems to be going amazing. And that's where the story should have ended. But I wouldn't be making this video if it did. 3 years later, Reagan is in a familiar territory. It is him, his camera, and his friend Lanry. Lanry is back to where he started, looking arguably more defeated than aged. We soon learn the news that the publication of Lanry's book has been halted due to him missing a deadline, and the reason being that his heroin use was in full swing once again. We hear Leo confront him, revealing that it has now been a full 10 years since the beginning of Lanry's initial project, and since the beginning of his addiction. The tone of this documentary is much less hopeful and much more painful to watch. Lanry is adamant to come off of heroin once and for all, and he is adamant to not use any alternative medication whatsoever. He wants to go cold turkey. The camera spends much of its time focused in one singular room, a room which is in a state of utter chaos and disarray. There are used syringes and papers scattered all over the floor, and Lanry spends a majority of his time curled up beneath his bedsheets, moaning in sheer agony. We are witnessing a man, at perhaps the lowest point in his life, begging his best friends to allow him to get another hit. This even escalates to the point of him threatening to jump out of the window. The documentary only lasted 4 days into his withdrawal attempt, and that's because Lanry managed to escape. And he left in his drug dealer's car. The filmmaker, Leo, and another friend go to a pub in sheer defeat and exhaustion. They don't return to see Lanry after this. In fact, it was a whole year before Leo even returned to speak with Lanry about his problem. By the end of this documentary, Lanry finally has his book published, but still isn't clean. But the story still doesn't end here. A final part to this documentary premiered at a film festival in June of this year. My friend Lanry. This final documentary doesn't follow his drug use, but instead follows Lanry's journey after a cancer diagnosis. This is the last time Lanry would appear in one of Leo Reagan's documentaries. Information about Lanry's life is hard to come by outside of how he's portrayed in these documentaries. But what is known is that Lanry unfortunately passed away in 2021 at age 61. But it is believed that he lived the last 11 years of his life completely clean from drugs. Lanry seemed to finally have defeated his demon. Speaking at Lanry's funeral in 2021, his friend and director of all of these documentaries had this to say about him. He was an extraordinary artist. He embraced each and every experience with fearlessness, compassion, and curiosity. Even in dying, he wanted to document the entire process, learn from it, and inform others. To anyone watching out there, I know this isn't my usual paranormal or internet-oriented disturbing video, but I wanted to highlight this specific documentary because I think life is so much more disturbing and strange than fiction ever can be. This series documented an obscure downfall and, in a way, resurrection of a visionary man whose sole intention was to give a voice to the outcasts of the world. Imagine this. You've just had an exhausting day. You get home and settle down on your sofa or on your bed. Your eyelids grow heavy, and soon everything is dark as you fall into a deep state of slumber. Then your eyes open and adjust to this. A tall dark figure lurking in your hallway or at the foot of your bed. He wears a large-brimmed dark hat, and his eyes are the only distinguishable feature, piercing down at you through the darkness. You try to move, but you can't. Are you dreaming? Are you awake? In this moment, reality is seemingly not separate from your dreaming state. You can feel a crushing weight on your chest, and you're left breathless. But there is nothing you can do about it. Eventually, you fall asleep again and wake to nothing out of the ordinary, except from the fleeting memory of this ghostly dream from the evening before. This experience has often fallen under the category of sleep paralysis, a phenomenon which has no definitive scientific explanation. It was believed to be caused that when the human brain is still awake, but the body remains in its sleeping state, resulting in the lack of muscle moving capabilities. It is believed that approximately between 8 and 50% of people will experience this terrifying incident at least once in their lifetime, whether they remember it or not. The strange thing about this is the overwhelming number of reports of people who've experienced sleep paralysis have said that they've seen the exact same figure throughout their dreams. The most common being that appears is the Hat Man, or his accomplices, known as the Shadow People. Shadow People have existed throughout many ancient cultures and religions. In ancient Greek mythology, they were known as the Shades. These were the restless wandering souls of the underworld, which would cling to heroic travellers passing through the caverns of this deathly realm. Shadowy figures have been a staple of our societal ghostly beliefs since the beginning of time, and humans with their curiosities have both been fascinated and horrified by what our imaginations can conjure up, even if it's against their will. But this still doesn't really explain why he or they appear in our sleeping state time and time again. Art Bell was a popular radio figure and hosted a show called Coast to Coast from 1988 until 2003. Coast to Coast was centered around the topics of the paranormal and conspiratorial. On their 2001 broadcast, they took calls from viewers to discuss the phenomena of sleep paralysis and the Shadow People. Eventually, Bell had listeners submit their drawings of what figures they could remember seeing from these episodes of their sleep paralysis. Here are some of these drawings. There it is. Even today, people tell their stories of their encounters with this shadowy voyeur. Here is one from the Reddit user, Russell West.
I don't know about any of you, but who else has experienced the phenomena known as the Hat Man? A shadowy being wearing a trench coat and a wide-brimmed hat, shrouded in darkness, who often visits you.
Try to wake up.
I've been waiting a long time to tell Reddit the full story of the whistle. This story requires many details, but it is unexplainable, creepy, and 100% true. And also with video evidence. When I was about 8 years old, I was taking my dog for a walk through the neighbourhood one night. It was maybe 11 p.m. We were next to a swamp woods area on the edge of our neighbourhood in Lansing, Michigan. I remember being very silent and slightly windy. And down in the swamp, I heard somebody whistling us. It sounded sort of like a bird, but each whistle was different enough for the lack of consistency and human-like. The whistle sounded high and low. I can't really describe it. The woman had a concerned, slightly terrified look on her face. I grabbed my hand and said we should go inside quickly. I didn't understand because I was too young. But seeing them freak out made me freak out too. After a while though, I need to know about that. 2 years later, I was taking my dog out again, late at night. There's a large bush that would easily obscure a person behind it just next to the front door. As I was finishing the walk, the whistle man stared at me. Same pitches, same inconsistent human-like tones. As soon as I heard it, a chill went down my spine, as I remembered exactly the feeling of seeing my mom, terrified, looking down into the swamp at something I couldn't see, and she couldn't either. I ran inside as fast as possible. Years went by, and I thought about it less and less. I told only a handful of people, and eventually it slipped from my mind. Fast forward to last summer, I'm 24, started dating my girl Sarah. We moved out to South Dakota for work. For Independence Day, we decided to go to PRSD and watch the fireworks along the bank of the Missouri River. There was a free camping spot behind the hospital where you could pitch your tent, hang out, and see the fireworks at the river. We were near the end of the campground, and there were very few people around us. As it was getting dark, the fireworks began. They were pretty far away, so the illumination they brought was very little. Plus, we had to sit right at the edge of the river to be able to see them. A huge thunderhead had been moving in, and a storm was imminent. So the air seemed electric, and the wind was picking up. The atmosphere was eerie to say the least. The police boats herded all the other boats off the river and left our area to do that also. Most of the other campers walked up by the river to have a better view of the fireworks. But Sarah and I stayed back. We were drinking PBR tall boys and kicking it. Suddenly, we heard the sound of a paddle methodically dipping into the water. We saw a figure steering a canoe about 20 meters.
Chicken breast. It is loved by many and despised by most. On today's video, I'm going to be doing something insane with it to see if it can be loved by everyone. And the first thing we got to do is to season it. So I went ahead and did so with a good amount of this round. As you can see, once I was done, the chicken was perfectly seasoned. Now that's what I'm talking about. Now since I have 3 of them, this is how this experiment is going to go down. The very first one will be a control. For the second one, let me explain. This is a Japanese Wagyu A5 Kobe beef chicken from Japan. And we're going to be using it to make the best chicken breast of my life. At least that's my hope. Because the next thing to do is to go ahead and start carving it. So I went ahead and started to remove the eye, which is the bottom part here, because the next thing to do is to go ahead and slice it real thin. And as I'm doing so, you can really appreciate the marbling of the style. As you can see, once I was done, I got some nice strips. Because the next thing to do is to go ahead and lay them down on a parchment paper. Putting them evenly here is the key. It's going to make wrapping the chicken easy. Talking about that, I laid the chicken right on top and used the parchment paper to help me out. As once I was done, take a look. The world's first Japanese Wagyu A5 steak wrapped chicken. And I'm really hoping that it's going to taste fantastic. As you can see, every single edge of it